is my pleasure to present today the last but not least lecture of the lecture series of this semester. And this is a live, half live. I have here the full room, and the other half or more are online. So it is my pleasure to present today, as I said, the last but not least lecture with pre-doctoral teaching fellows coming from the School of Architecture of Madrid. So as you know, we have an agreement with the School of Architecture that we do this relationship between our school and the School of Madrid, in which every semester, 2 excellent designers, teaching fellows come to the school. And this is always a motivation for celebration. And this cannot be less because we have COVID. So we are, even if it's at the end of, almost at the end of the semester, we're looking forward to listen to your work. So Andrea Bardon is a Spanish architect, a candidate of PhD in advanced architectural project, and her research focuses on the impact of cultural hybridization. Her case study is on the area of Mayan traditional indigenous culture and the influence of globalization in it. Has also practice in which she has worked on domestic environments and doing projects of collective housing in different offices in Madrid. Guillermo Lockhart is graduate architect from University of Uruguay. He earned his master's degree in advanced architectural design also at ETSAM, Madrid, and where he is also PhD candidate along with Andrea in Madrid. His professional activity is around residential program and affordable housing. And his research is on the spaces of creation, taking case study around the moment of Andy Warhol in New York. So both have these 3 legs of teaching in process of getting more and more experience in teaching, the PhD and the professional activity. So today the intention is to present themselves at the school in these different areas and activities. So students and I, faculty, everyone get to know them better. So please join me welcoming Andrea and Guillermo to the School of Architecture, even if it's at the end of the semester and we have been crossing all in the corridors, etc. But we are really pleased to be able to listen to you, to your work. Looking forward to it. I think first is Andrea, so thank you.
Going to hold it just in case. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you all of you for being here. Thank you, Margarita, for this amazing presentation. And thank you, the School of Architecture, for this semester and the students. That is being a weird situation. And I really appreciate all the work and the welcoming that you have done. Well, the goal of this lecture, as Margarita said, is to try to introduce myself and to explain what has been happening in my personal life too, my personal experience to arrive to my research line. I wanted to, I think this, sorry. Okay, thank you. I wanted to start the presentation with this little part of the syllabus of the course that I've been teaching, collective housing, that it makes the points in the critical thinking related to the design process of the course. So that made me think that in my last year of design studio with Professor Sancho in Madrid, we had to do a project of a mixed use of market, artistic production, and housing. And as in many cases in the school, the surface were given, and we had to do the first approach of proposing different types of organization for the program. So I thought it was a great opportunity to think about my personal experience and different social schemes where I could see these 3 uses in different ways. I had in mind where I visit the Uru ethnia in the Titicaca Lake in Peru, and they have these schemes of the floating islands where they can make the different constructions. Or I had also in mind whenever I visit the Bosque Manos in Tanzania, and they have the longitudinal scheme where the main spaces for the cultural events are in one side and the housing units are in the other. And especially I had in mind the Mayan culture that for them is really important, the production. So they keep all the ships and all the livestock in the middle of the circulate scheme and leaving the perimeter for the housing units to protect it. That is really different approach. So the next year, I had the chance to do my first research project that it was called Habitat, spatial diagrams from primitive architecture, and it had 3 parts. The first one was learning about the principles, the factors, and the elements of the primitive culture and architecture. The second one, it was an analysis of different cases studies. And the third one, it was my reading, my traversal reading between all the cases studies and different spatial composition thoughts that I had about it. So to make the selection of which communities should I study, I used the main theorists like Amos Rappaport or Guidoni or Paul Olivier, among others, to see which one had more information, and I could make this kind of sheets comparing the social factors, the spatial factors, the physical factors, and then how is the settlement and the constructions made in all the scales. And the third part, it was this kind of articles, thinking about the composition and how different ways of life and different cultures approach them. And then I presented to Becoming, that it was the Spanish pavilion for the Bienal Venice in 2018. So it was part of the Bienal too, with some other colleagues from the PSAM. From there, I saw my clear interest in the indigenous communities. So I applied to the grant, the scholarship of the University of the Polytechnic of Madrid. And I had the opportunity to travel to Guatemala and work with the Association CONI, that they were trying to implement the schools in the rural part, in the mountains, for the indigenous community. So I was a coordinator there in this project, sometimes using just geometrical strength because we didn't have any kind of machines or high technology. But the main goal during that time was to learn about those communities and which kind of challenges or opportunities were there, because in my way back, I had to propose a project for them. So there are communities that they are situated in Alta Verapaz, that is a department in the middle north of the country. It is divided by a high line of mountains, and it has a social and economic condition really specific because they don't have many resources of the economic. It's a really poor area, and at the same time, the 80% of the population are indigenous, they are Quechua. So they were the communities I was working with, and they have this tradition Maya really present, but at the same time, you can clearly see the integration with elements that they have been taken from the global culture. So in my way back, I proposed Nimakmu, and I wanted to focus in 2 things that they were important to me. One was the way of the living, that it was agriculture. Their way of life, it is settled their year by the crops. So whenever they have to do all the work for the crops, they have work. And whenever there is no rain and no crops, it's a really tough time of the moment for them, of the year. And the main crops are the coffee and the cardamom. That is what they sell to live. And the other problem that it was quite important for me, because I come from Madrid, so I was used to work in dense city, is the dispersion that is present in the indigenous communities, and especially in this one that they say that they don't have communal spaces to organize themselves. So these 2 points were really important for me. And I had in mind this work that I have done about other communities. And I have learned how the Piaroa, for example, they make huge constructions. They work also in the agriculture, but they have a really good way of organizing the community because they have these big spaces. Also, the Indian people in the Amazonas forest, they make the malocas, what is also a big construction, and they live and work in there. And especially the Dayaks in Borneo Island, which name means like long house town. So like a huge town that is even the whole town where they live and they work and they organize themselves. So that's why I wanted to propose Nimakmu, that this is a small factory so they can make their processes, but it's at the same time also a town hall or a community center, trying to encourage them not only to reinforce their capacity as a community, but also to change the work that they were doing, being able to work in their crops. So I was working in one specific community that is child peg, that is an example and many others, and the constraints to work in it was really different. So coming from Madrid, that usually we have high buildings or streets, I had to work with the topography, with the main roads that are just a little that make the perimeter of the community, also the density of the different houses placed around, which spaces are already occupied by the forest or which spaces are occupied by the crops and I didn't want to lose. So that's, and also all the sun that it was coming from the south in these little hills, that it was important for me so they could dry the seeds and the coffee and the cardamom. So that's how I choose that point. And it was my starting point, the placement to be working with. It was also a great opportunity to learn architecture, not only from croquis or some architectural books as we always do. And I did a lot of little trips to the library of the agronomous school of the engineering that is close to the architecture, trying to learn from the FAO systems of a sustainable way of working with coffee and cardamom without needing electricity or big industrial infrastructure. And my conclusions were how I can move all the crops around the processes, how I can keep the crops in a dry space and not touching the ground so they can be in a well condition, how I can integrate this solar system, and also the importance of the outside spaces because of the weather. So my starting point, as I said, it was the placement, and I wanted to work with the crop pattern. Also placement, the way of situating the chimney, and trying to integrate the one more roof as they do in the community using the orthogonal pattern to arrive to this complex where they can work and live together. So also the opportunity of working with this other grid from the crops allowed me to have spaces for the arrival and some little plazas to be connected to the only road where the cars can get into the community to be able to the transportation of all the products. And the spaces were related to that processes, the arrival, the drop-off, the classification, the cleaning space, the dry space in the outside space, but also in the chimney and the upper levels where we could storage the products without having any problem. And then a final point to get the products out the community. So arriving to how to build this complex, I had in mind the two materialities that are present in the architecture of the area that is really dense, but one side, but also using the wood for really light skins. And it is made because of the influence that earthquakes have had in the area, especially one in 1973 that it was really dramatic, and that took like all the solid, dense construction to change to reinforced systems or light systems with wood. So I try to implement that in the project, and especially in the ground and in the chimney, and also using the chimney as an opportunity to use the slopes to take the air, hidden air, to dry the seeds, and also to move a little mill in the bottom for the corn tortillas that are really important in the community, and they can be used near to the plaza in the bottom level. So with this system in the first level, in the first place, then I wanted to work with the other system, with the lighting system, because of the constructions in the community that are made with these little panels of wood. So seeing their properties, I needed to design a modular system to solve all the facades and the different heights from 3 meters into 15 meters that they need to be solved to arrive to this big roof. And trying to integrate in them the details as similar, as realistic as possible with the wood, trying to do a project that is appropriate for them, but also appropriable, and they could work in the construction of it. So that would be the final forest that it can be integrated, and this other image that I think at the end it is kind of a temple, but also a little factory for themselves. So that was a great moment to think that my interest was really linked to the cultural, to the spatial, to the architecture, but also to the product quality of the communities. That I saw that in many projects that they were interesting for me, like the Ses Pompeii of Lina Borbardi during my college years. So whenever I was starting the PhD courses, I tried to focus with this spatial productive condition that I had around me in Spain, and seeing the difference between how is before and after the industrialization. So I did several projects of research, little projects, and the one that it was more useful for me for the research around the grain storage, the Red Nacional de Silos, that for the Spanish people, we all see it as an iconic thing that we see in the roads all the time, to understand that present, that cultural present, but also linked to the productive system. As I said, it was, it started with in the 40s, and it was a whole system into the 90s. And they were constructed all around the country, and now many of them, they have been taken out, or they are still there, but without that use. Or before they were this element really useful for the systems, like in this picture of the 1954, but right now, for example, in Navalcarnero, it is an element that is integrated in the town as a building with no use, but a big presence that sometimes even is a competition with the church or within the institutions. So it is something to think about how this element had this present in the communities. And I also had in mind the work from the Beckers, the typologies, and how the industrial buildings have arrived to have this presence and this identity. But it was completely the opposite of what I had lived in Guatemala, that I had this collection of pictures, but the school is the same, of the house, is the same, that the bus stop, of the grain. So they have this no typology hierarchy. And I wanted to keep working on that, trying to search for the little details of the ordinary architecture in these communities. So that's when I proposed tradition and global culture, the local architectures associated to the production in Guatemala, what is my PhD project. And knowing that I'm not the first one that is going to look through, and put my interest in ordinary architecture, I wanted to see which was my focus and my point of view to approach this work, that it was not thinking about vernacular static architecture or just contemporary architecture, but having this kind of, sorry, a view to the culture as a hybrid element, as I said, of this community that they have many layers of many years and cultures that they have been passing by. So the influence that I have seen, they were not only if they have a cell phone or how they think, but I think there is also an influence in the architecture, and that's what I'm trying to work with. For example, these are the stairs in Chichicastenango, and it is one of the places known as the most important Mayan points where all the festivities occur. They make these big parties, and it's a huge place for the Mayan community. But the background actually of all that decorations is a church from the 1545, a Catholic church that at the same time it was settled in these steps that are 18 steps from a Mayan temple. So there is this kind of layering in the models. So that's how I arrived to think that the model zero that I was seeing in the indigenous communities, in the words of Paul Olivier and others, it is actually one model that then it has been other models in between, and right now we can see many of them mixed together. And I guess there is a future hypothesis to think how that is going to become with the globalization taking place in these territories. So that cultural factors that I hadn't think about a few years before is something to rethink. In all the scales, I think for the territorial grid, I thought about them more like an island of power culture, and I think the development of the roads and the other ways of working become them more an archipelago where they are connected to other situations. So also we can see how Mayan people, you can find them in the market of bigger cities and not only in their community doing their family work. Or also the typologies that I have to work with. They are not only the traditional ones, but also some that they have come from the outside. Or in the scale of the construction, that it was analyzed linked to the physical possibilities, and now they are integrating the metal sheet many times, or even little objects that I have seen, like bottles making stairs or roads, thinking about a second-hand construction with the elements that they have. So that's my point of view, the second-hand construction that I was seeing, that made me think that it's not only a one-way of changing, but also a two-way, as I saw in Brussels during my time there, where they were all the time trying to do the same thing of recycling materials or this kind of hippie communities to go back to other systems that they had in the indigenous community, or even in the studio that I was working on. For the furniture, they tried all the time this recycle trend, or for bigger projects also to integrate these materials that they just seem like really basic. So that's what had happened years before, trying to have these two layers of technology, but basic primitive schemes. So right now I find myself here in Tulane with this work in progress of my PhD, and I think it's been a great opportunity to find work like the Robert Wacob, who look into the same communities that I'm trying to work with and have pictures and photographs that shows that back then they were still using solid soil, and the house, it was also the house and the production. So I think it's going to be a great experience to keep thinking of what is the house and how globalization can change these communities. Thank you so much.
Hello. Well, first I want to thank Iñaki and Margarita for this excitement and this incredible opportunity of being here, all their help and guidance. I want to thank also the School of Architecture for their warm welcome and their hospitality, and of course, the students for this amazing semester. Um, I want to start explaining very briefly about the title of this lecture that's called Alternative Pragmatism. So you'll find that these combinations of words, although I find them very interesting, it's more they represent more of a problem than a clear concept. Um, in this way, in this sense, I have chosen the word alternative, even though when someone says alternative, it begs the question to alternative to what? Someone alternative could be others normative. So I think that my work, my professional practice, and my research um, you can talk now. Okay, it's working. Okay, so I was telling you that I have also have chosen this word pragmatic, trying to stay away from the philosophical considerations and only to address the quality of the ordinary and the value of overcoming practical constraints as possibilities. So. Now it's never working. Okay. You're gonna do this. Sorry. So my professional practice, my research, and my teaching is consciously or unconsciously focused on three different topics that are often, if not always, overlapping each other. The first one is what I call updating home. It means that I think that there is a lot of functions that have been superimposed over the spaces of the home, and strikingly, its architecture continued to remain the same. Also, the creative workspace, and this concept means that traditionally the workspace has been a burden for organizations and companies, and now they acquire a new dimension when it's proven that these workspaces uh, can acquire a new dimension, improving the creativity of their users. And the third one is social engagement, thinking about that in scarce context, the development of different projects can be in themselves valuable material. So I have started my professional practice founding a merger between a traditional architectural firm and a small experimental construction company, what I call construction studio. This construction studio had created a design and construction team formed with different carpenters, plumbers, electricians, civil engineers, landscape architects, and so on, that started working from the very beginning of each project with having in mind different construction systems and budget. So you will see that in all of my projects from the very beginning, there's a focus on the construction. So this work system, of course, tends to focus on a close relationship to the craftsmanship, and also in the use of both natural and industrial materials. But it also led to a simplification of the architectural form. So we can see here different projects that I've been working on, and you will see that primary form is repeating in all of them. So I'm going to start with this concept that I was telling you briefly about a painting home, and I wanted to start with this painting by the painter Nicole Eisenman that I think reflects pretty good what a home would be like today. Here we can see different characters, different people with undetermined age, ethnicity, gender, and so on. They are all drinking, resting, partying, playing with their cell phones, and so on. So I think that the medium this painter is using is ambiguous, and in that sense, it relates very good to what the atmosphere of the home is nowadays. So there have been a lot of social, cultural, and economic phenomena that have been affected the home recently. For example, the increase in the size of family, or the impossibility of access to young people to affordable housing. So in that sense, I'm presenting this ongoing project of affordable housing in Uruguay. This is the plot that you can see. It's in a suburban but consolidated area, and it has in front of it a really big park, and at the back of it a lake. Incredible, this plot was really inexpensive because it had previously an electrical transformer in front of it, so buyers were scared that it could be they were frightened because they were worried about their health, and if not, all the paperwork they would need to do to change the place of this electrical transformer. So we found a group of people that were interested in buying affordable housing, most of them single people or couples of 1 or 2 children. And with a group of financial advisors and lawyers, we created a company with the only purpose of conducting this project. They bought the plot that, as I was saying, it was really inexpensive. And through the brand new promoted housing law in Uruguay, we created what we thought it could be affordable, environmentally friendly, quality housing in a consolidated area of the city. This would be the traditional equation in this kind of development, and so we try to eliminate the developer and real estate margin to create a price that for the people that would only be the plot cost and the construction cost. So the regulations in this plot, we pretty soon found out that permitted us to construct much more than we desired. So we adapted the project into 2-level affordable housing, and because we really thought that having only 2 levels would permit the people to have a close relationship to nature, to the surrounding nature that was, of course, the park at the east and the lake at the west. Also, it was a much better fit within the context. So this is finally the final image we presented to the users, and here we can see the project has collective courtyards, have a bonfire area, vegetable gardens, access, of course, to the lake, and a multi-purpose room for all of them. As I was saying, and I was telling you about this design and construction team from the preliminary stages in this project, we draw these structural, sanitary, and electrical plans, even with some details, because we are already thinking about construction. Also, this work system is also related to our plan. The idea of the project, the main strategy was to use non-hierarchical rooms that could be used for bedrooms, could be used for playrooms, could be used for study rooms, even bigger, really huge dressing rooms, for example. And the general scheme of the project would be the rooms, then a strip for circulation, and then a strip for wet areas. That would be the kitchen, bathrooms, laundry room, and they're all connected to interior courtyard. This is the plan and an action of one of the units. There you can see that each unit has a collective front yard, but at the same time a private garden. And in this case, the unit is using 2 of the rooms as bedrooms and one of them as a desk. Here are some of images of the project that's ongoing. The second aspect I was telling you about is about the creative workspace. So I think that architecture is made by the relation between the architect and the users, pretty similar to what Roland Barthes states in his book, The Death of the Author, and the relationship between the author and the reader. I think that as architects, we need to be aware of the creativity of the users, and that we need to think that the users can somehow change and add new meanings to the spaces that we create. So that's why in my PhD, I continue with this research, and I start studying these art studios, mainly focusing on Krasner and Pollock's studio, Bardon studio in the Hamptons, the Silver Factory Loft by Andy Warhol in Manhattan, and the French artist Daniel Buren, who claims he doesn't have a studio, that his studio is in the street. Through an exhaustive studying of films, photographs, and other documentation, I came up with original plans for these studios, just to find out what were the design strategies that these artists were using to increase their creativity. In this case, I'm showing now the ones I found in the Silver Factory between 1964 and 1968 that were design strategies that were used by Andy Warhol, but also by their assistant, Billy Lineage. So here you can see that all of these artworks were created during these 4 years. We have painting, sculpture, film, music, and so on, and was all within the frame of this specific space, and all within the frame of these design strategies: appropriation, reprogramming, the unfinished, the central void, artificial isotropy, and domesticated production and productive domesticity. So these design strategies are, of course, the main objective is to use them in real projects. So this was the case when a really young company wanted to move their workspace, and they found a really old industrial warehouse in the center of the city. Of course, the budget was really low, so the main strategy was to focus on the collective workspace, trying to have a non-hierarchical workspace, but at the same time being careful about the relation between privacy and autonomy. In that sense, we used two main tools. One was color. We used black and white, that were the colors that the company used in their logo. And also we used a really cheap compensated wood to kind of vinculate the space with domesticity. This professional practice and research is represented in some publications, in books, and in different journals. And the third concept I wanted to present was this is social engagement, and I want to present this project that's called America Sport and Social Club for Children. That was a project that was born from the necessity of relocating this club that was illegally occupying public land, and at the same time it was very precarious and also had problems with flooding. So we contact a private company, and we contact local authorities, and we managed to move this club to a park that was nearby. It was a really important decision because the club was rooted in its neighborhood. There were more than 200 families that were related to the club, and there were children between 6 and 13 years old that were in pretty close contact with the club. So we started a participatory process with different workshops with the help of a psychologist, and we have different steps to try to listen and try to use this concept that I was telling you about before, the creativity of the users. So this was all represented in a documentary that was aired in the national TV. And the same as the other projects before, we had a really low budget, and really all of the money was going to the construction of the fields, of the soccer fields. That was kind of the most important aspect of the project. So we need to came up with a really inexpensive way of building the club. So we found that there was these prefabricated panels that are usually used for cold meat chambers, and we can add some termination in both sides, and this was a really inexpensive, really fast, really easy to transport panels that would make the building of this project really fast. So this is the general plan. It's really basic. It's all modulated with these prefabricated panels. It has a kitchen and an open barbecue that is used by the club to sell food and drinks during the games. And then it has 2 locker rooms and bathrooms. The main idea, probably the only architectural idea we could use was to have this open but covered space in the middle that was trying to emulate the tunnels of the really of the professional soccer stadiums, and at the same time it was a covered space that could be used as an extension of the multi-purpose room. So this was the final idea, the final image we presented to the children and the parents. We also, during these workshops, during the participation process, we hired a visual designer to create with the children different signals, different ways of communicating, and for the children to feel identified with the club. And this was the final inauguration. From the morning to tonight, there were more than 1,000 people enjoying how children play soccer. So it's very gratifying to see the identification and the involvement of all these families with the club that are always doing tasks and chores of maintenance to keep the club alive. So as I was saying previously, the title Alternative Pragmatism in any way tries to define a way of working or a perimeter with which one should work. I think that creativity in architecture is trying to adapt to new surroundings and to create new frameworks. So the surrounding context is the common place for the people who have nothing in common. So let us devote our time to link our private ambitions with the public needs, doing and having a social responsibility through collaboration and through building only the essential. Thank you very much.
Take questions? Okay, yes. And there was any questions on that? We take questions. I think 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yeah, we can be checking the Q&A. And you can just ask me to ask questions here or online.
Where's the mic? I guess, yeah, so I think we take questions, maybe 2, 3 questions from the audience. Chris is raising a hand. We also take questions from webinar, from outside. If you can chat, write them in the chat. Chris, perfect.
I'm just going to bring this mic to you.
It won't sound much better online, but it'll help.
For Guillermo, I'm just curious more about how your business is structured in terms of all those people you employ and who employs who, or if you work with these lawyers and these contractors just on a contract basis. Really more about just how you guys set up.
Like the team with lawyers and financial advisors was only for this specific project, but the design and construction team is kind of a group of people that, depending on the project, we kind of call each one of them, and we form kind of a group before we start to think about the project, and we organize to make all the work together. And they also participate like in the executive projects, even in the construction management, or even in the final construction. So they are really from the beginning to the end of the project.
Okay. And you have a partner. I saw someone else's name. Is it just the two of y'all designers?
I don't know what other names of.
Oh, I think it said Jimenez Lockhart.
Yeah. I had a studio with another colleague. Yeah, we were both architects. He was more specialized in the area of construction, so we kind of complement each other pretty well.
I think it's a question related to you also have experience on construction.
Exactly. I'm coming from.
No, I was saying that Chris, that is not grad student who also has experience in construction. I guess that their interests come from that.
So is your background in the trades at all as well, or I mean, just to focus on construction? It seems so practical, not to, you know.
Just sounds better.
Can you repeat, please?
I'm just curious more about your background, like why you choose to focus that way, as opposed to the theoretical side of things.
Because probably my career led also in that direction, because we started to find out that our clients ask for first the architectural design, but then they needed people to build the things, to build the buildings, of course. And these clients were and the clients have already they have confidence in us. So I think that from my first project, the client asked me if I would be interested in construction. So I just jump in, and then from then onwards, it was always about trying to design, but always thinking about construction afterwards.
Andrea, I'm curious to know if so you have been doing several housing projects. I know professionally, and of course, you're teaching that. Have you found interesting vernacular domestic devices or organizational strategies that you can translate somehow to current typologies?
I think we can. I think there are many concepts that they are present in the present vernacular, I will say, that we can transfer to our projects. I think, like, for example, how we understand, like, there is one test that we have been working this year with about the home, how in the Middle Ages the home was conceived, what is the public, what is the private, and what is for us the sleeping space, for example, or the eating space. And going to these communities, for example, for me was a great experience to break my fixed ideas or the ideas that I have seen working in the studios in Spain, or the houses that, or even by my own, because that makes you think other opportunities or other ways of dividing. I don't think, well, for example, in Spain and by my own, I don't think it's that easy for me right now to make that kind of project, because I think you need a good client with open mind that allows you that, or to have a public competition that you can encourage that. But I think for sure, going back and looking for some open ideas present in that organization, it would be good for us as a learning, at least. Then we'll see.
Checking the chat.
Oh yeah, there's a question here that says, do you think that firms that hybridize construction and architectural design are where the future of the practice will go in general? I think this might be a question for Guillermo.
I think that. Oh, okay.
I think that the answer would be no. At least in my experience, I could do this merger between an architectural firm and a construction company because the construction of my projects were in a small to medium scale. Probably here would be small scale. I mean, in the United States, because when you reach such a complexity or such a big scale, you need other type of organization to focus on the construction. You just can handle that much with a really small experimental construction company.
I have a question. Kind of talking a little bit about like your process of like going to your pre-doctorate and kind of, can you talk a little bit about that, about like what phase you are in that and like what are your next steps? Like what do you need to deliver? Like what is that process like in general?
Can you repeat like the process?
Like just what do you need to do after this to finish your PhD?
Well, in my case, because of COVID and because of having a really specific study case that is Guatemala, so traveling was really linked to that. I thought that my thesis was going to have the main resource on traveling and doing this technical reading, but I think that now I have to focus on the historical, also research, to have like an historical point of starting to make that globalization comparison that I want to do. So in my case, I think I have to focus time. Like for example, Robert Wacko, this author that I have found is really useful to have like a starting point, then with my material be able to make these comparisons about the time of the change in these communities. So I would say historical and library work, and then in my case I have to go back to Guatemala to finish the field work.
In my case, I have to go to the primary sources. So I need to go to New York, and I need to go to the archives of Andy Warhol. And I'm waiting for, of course, this pandemic to end to go there. But yeah, I think that mostly my work is related to going to primary sources, and then of course, as Andrea says, have time to to be productive and have time of concentration and writing, and of course also continue with some interviews that I'm having with different architects, different artists, and so on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think maybe if there are no more questions, we can close for today. Thank you so much. So welcome to intercept Andrea or Guillermo in the corridors and ask them more about the research and timing and everything for inspiration. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.